Talking today to Ingrid Kopp, who runs the Digital Initiatives Programme at the Tribeca Film Institute. Ingrid, we're here today talking about digital storytelling. Where did that start?
Well, I think digital storytelling probably goes back a long way, but for me, my interest in it really started with social media and with the possibilities of the web. And so for me, I mean, obviously you could go back to CD-ROMs and before that to artists exploring, split screens and things like that. But I'm really interested in how social media and the web allow us to tell stories in different ways.
And what were the first examples of this kind of digital storytelling, and how would you characterize it?
I think for me, I mean, and again, there are examples going back much further when you go back to things like the CD-ROMs of the 90s. But for me, it really starts with projects like Gaza Zerot, which was a project that Arte did, exploring the border between Gaza and Israel, where you were really thinking about what the web as a medium would look like for storytelling, rather than thinking about it as a distribution pipe.
What could you see on screen in that particular?
It was a project that allowed you to explore 30 days, where you could look on both sides of the border, so you could click between Gaza or Israel, and no matter where you click, the other would always be faded in the background, and you'd see the border down the middle of the screen. So as an audience member, you were participating in the story and making decisions, and for me that really changed the way I thought about how you could tell documentary stories using the web.
The French also have been particularly strong in this, haven't they? It's the French and Canadians who kind of, in a sense, started some of these traditions.
Right. I mean, France and Canada have really invested heavily in interactive storytelling, particularly interactive documentaries. And so they have, I think, the highest quality output. Obviously, when you invest heavily, you get really good results. And so I've been following a lot of what Arte have been doing, for example, and in Canada, NFB Interactive, that's the National Film Board of Canada, have been doing extraordinary work, like Bear 71 recently. Really, again, pushing this idea of what the web as a medium can do.
And one aspect of that is interactivity, isn't it?
Interactivity, yeah. And for me, yes, it's interactivity. It's rethinking what audiences can do when they're exploring a film. And I think what is really interesting about some of the best projects is they create this lean back, lean forward scenario where the audience can consume it like they would a traditional film. They can lean back and just let it wash over them, or they can click with the mouse or scroll on the screen and have a different kind of experience. And that's something that I think is very, very interesting, is allowing people to do both, passive and active.
And that implies also many more platforms, doesn't it? Particularly tablets and mobiles.
Absolutely. So there is this tradition of transmedia storytelling where you tell stories distributed across platforms, often using social media as well. We've seen less of that, honestly, in documentaries, although there obviously are opportunities for that. But just in terms of actually taking these projects to tablets and to mobile is hugely exciting, and I'm really keen to see a little bit more of that actually in documentary storytelling.
So what was the first big digital storytelling project that really kind of put this genre on the map?
I mean, I think Gaza Zerot was definitely the first. There were ways, I think something like Kevin MacDonald's Life in a Day was a project that I think really made people think differently about what user-generated content could do, for example. And the fact that this was taking footage that you may see on YouTube, and then it ended up in a film that ended up going to Sundance and getting distribution and being shown in cinemas. I think that did make people think a little bit differently about how films get produced and who gets to be part of that. But I think if you look at the web native stuff, it's really going back to what Arte and the NFB in Canada were doing.
What are you funding that's really exciting you?
I am really, really interested. One of the things that really interests me about this whole space is this idea of who gets to tell stories and who gets to listen to those stories. So what's really exciting me is actually funding international stories. Our fund is international. We're looking for international stories and international teams making those stories. And I think what's really extraordinary about this space now is the fact that a mobile phone is both a camera and a video player. And so that really is changing the kinds of stories that we're getting, and it's really making me rethink what documentary storytelling can look like. So I think for me the most exciting stories are things like Dadaab stories, a project we funded a couple of years ago about the Dadaab refugee camp, where refugees in the camp were telling their own stories.
And you've got two in progress that we talked about earlier. Revolutionary Optimists in India. Describe what that project is.
So Revolutionary Optimists is a documentary feature film that's actually been out now about a guy who is doing some extraordinary work on the ground with kids in India. And out of that came this project called Map Your World, which is about to be released, which is a mapping tool on using mobile phones so that kids can, well, not just kids, actually anyone, but it's designed specifically for kids, can map their own community. So they can map things like garbage collection or polio vaccinations, and then they can actually produce that data and say, hey, why aren't, to the mayor or whoever it may be, why aren't you doing something about this? And what is really extraordinary about that is it's a tool that came out of a story, and the fact that we can fund that, I think, is very, very exciting.
And it implies a different relationship, doesn't it, between audiences, users, makers?
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about this space is all of these words are being constantly redefined. The audience used to be this passive body that would sit quietly in a cinema in a dark room, and they would sit quietly for 70 minutes until the film was over, maybe eat their popcorn. And now, we talk about the people formerly known as the audience. They're active participants. They're often creating their own stories, and that creates a really interesting possibility for a feedback loop.
And you're making a project about logging in Liberia. Tell me about that one.
So this, again, is a feature-length documentary called Logs of War, which is about logging and resource extraction in Liberia. And alongside that, they are creating a tool for activists across Africa to collect data on resource extraction in their own areas.
And that's being made by a Kenyan team of filmmakers.
Yeah, it's a co-production, but most of the team are based in Kenya. And again, this is what's really exciting about what we can do now, is we're seeing lots of really interesting innovation tech hubs springing up all over the world. And what's really fun about this work is that we get to bring technologists, designers, and storytellers together to make work using new technology wherever they may be. And I think that is kind of extraordinary.
And tell me, give me some of the mechanics of, let's say I was an African filmmaker wanting to apply to the program. What do I need to do?
Sure. So the TFI, it's called the TFI New Media Fund. We have an annual submission program. So we're going to open again in 2014 in March, I believe. Simple application form online. We fund 4 to 8 projects a year. We give each project between $50,000 and $100,000, and it's a straight grant, so we don't take any rights. We're very easy to work with, and we really encourage collaboration. So we'll often work with other organizations and film bodies who are funding this work.